Once again, everyone, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm Steve with SIETAR. We're happy really to have you with us this afternoon. I am most pleased to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Katrin Lichterfeld. I met Katrin back in 2014, I believe it was, at a trainers conference. It's an annual conference, so she and I see each other every year, and I can honestly say that seeing Katrin again is one of the highlights of the conference for me. Katrin is a person who combines practical experience with theoretical knowledge. She worked for many years in the export department of a beverage company, and then decided to extend her skills and knowledge by pursuing a master's degree in second language acquisition, as well as an international certification in business English training. She is a freelance trainer focusing on business communication and intercultural competence. And in addition to that, she is a teacher trainer. She's a keynote speaker, and she's a triathlete. And with that, I would like to turn the webinar over to our speaker, Katrin Lichterfeld, with her session on dealing with accent, identity, and culture when using English as a lingua franca. Katrin, it's all yours.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. Thank you, Steve, for your very kind introduction, and thanks to SIETAR Europe for giving me this opportunity to talk about some of my favorite topics. The moment a person starts speaking, there is a question in our head. Where is she from? What do you think? Some people think that I'm from the Netherlands. Yes, actually, I live very close to the Netherlands. It's only a 1-hour drive. And yes, my grandmother's family came from the Netherlands. Maybe those are reasons why I feel quite closer to the Netherlands than to other regions, like, for example, Thuringia or Bavaria. Actually, I am a local of Dortmund in the Ruhr area in Germany. And I have been working there for more than 15 years. And this webinar is supposed to answer questions concerning the topics accent and language, which will be dealt with in the first part. Where are you a local, and how to integrate it into intercultural training. The second part will cover English as corporate language, and finally we'll have a look at back to work as usual. What does our world look like? It's a world called VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity. And at the same time, there has been a huge disruption by the COVID-19 pandemic. Nonetheless, we have to deal with globalization, migration, and on the other hand, there's another development, another big movement, a movement towards global English. We have to deal with linguistic and cultural diversity, and our digital literacy is very important too. We would like to join the global virtual world by using English. But what English? Whose English? In the 80s, Katrin kind of developed a 3-circle model describing the inner circle with the UK, the so-called native-speaking countries, the outer circle with former colonies like Singapore and India, and the expanding circles. And if you look at the figures, the amount of native speakers is up to 10% only. And the question of ownership of the language is very important now. David Crystal said that the number of people using a language, speaking a language, defines the ownership of a language. And that means that nowadays people communicating in international business have a chance of 80% to communicate with other so-called non-native speakers. Multilingualism is on the rise. This is the headline of a publication by the New York Times. And now I would ask you, what do you think? What about the global rate of multilingualism in general? And then I would like you to kind of write a ranking of the countries. Who has the highest rate of multilingualism and who has the lowest rate? Okay, start putting your answers into the chat box, please. Okay, so no ideas, no answers. Singapore #1, USA the biggest amount of, okay, Great Britain, global rate 70%, okay, the Netherlands, okay, this seems that we have quite different answers here. Let's give you the real answer. So there's a percentage of 60%. That means multilingualism is the new norm. And the biggest rate of multilingual speakers you can find in Singapore, the Netherlands, and at the very end, we have got the United States with only 25%. Although there are many advantages like cultural confidence and neurological fitness, there is still the ghost of the native speaker, monolingual bias or monolingual filters that kind of have an impact on how we communicate. In the journal Psychology Today, there was the question, does the change of language imply a change of personality? Grossian came to the conclusion that actually context is important and the interlocutors we have to deal with in a specific situation. What about the native speaker? David Crystal is of the opinion that it is just a myth. Our accent is very important for our identity. On the other hand, there has always been a tension between identity and intelligibility. What do you think? How many people do really speak the high prestige accent of RP or the Queen's English or GA with regard to American English? Write the number in the chat box, please. 2%, 5%, 10%, okay, yeah, 3%, 10%. Yeah, actually, it's 10% only. David Crystal is of the opinion that there is only one profession that really needs to get rid of the accent. Any idea who that could be? Now, actually thinks that, oh, sorry, that was too fast. What about the average wage gap? Do you think there is an average wage gap if you have an accent? Give me actors. Okay, we'll get back to that question later. First, what about the average wage gap? Spies need to hide it, 20%. Yes, great guesses, exactly. So we have an average wage gap of 20%, which is very similar to the gender gap. And the spy is the one who should get rid of the accent. So many authors came across a lot of studies, which you can find here. And the overall consensus was that there's a real tyranny of accents and that you can notice discrimination against non-standard accents and non-native accents at the same time. And as a consequence of this, accent is kind of an overlooked bias, or some people also call it filter or frame. And it has to be added to the map of inclusion. We have to celebrate diversity of accents. So at the beginning, I asked this question, where are you from? Taya Selassie gave a brilliant TED talk about this topic. She thinks that this question is something that you should not really use. We are made up of our experiences, and she thinks we should ask, where are you a local? And that is defined by our rituals, our relationships, and our restrictions. So this is the first part where we could get into practice. You could ask your learners, you could ask yourself maybe as well, where are you a local? Are there specific rituals, relationships, or restrictions? Are there any places that you relate to these three things? Please put them in the chat box. What are your rituals, relationships, restrictions? Where are you a local? Yeah, rural area, Sweden, Scotland, European, okay, Mexico, okay. At home, Dublin, yes, okay. So, Northern Italy, yes. So, the main point is that we become aware of this complexity of the multiple identities that we have. And it is very important to have a sense of security. And this is what Tom Zeniger, a man who worked in experiential learning, kind of developed as well, his learning zone model. The question is, where are we in our comfort zone? Where's our learning zone? And where is our panic zone? And as Steve mentioned, I am a triathlete, and I think sometimes you have to be a brave athlete. You have to adopt an athlete's mindset. You have to raise to the occasion. You have to accept your personal limits. And this is the only way that will help you to grow, to adapt to certain situations. And this is how the OECD answers the question. Again, a mindset, a growth mindset, a combination of metacognition, meta-learning, where all the three parts, the knowledge, the skills, and the character will help you to become a 21st century learner. And there is another organization that kind of paid attention to this 21st century learner. It is the Council of Europe. It consists of 47 member states, and in the year 2001, it developed the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, Learning, Teaching, and Assessment. And although there has been a lot of criticism, the number of translations, 40, kind of indicates the importance, indicates that this is a kind of gold standard for this area. And they took into account what kind of developments have been happening, and a total of 1,500 international experts came together, and they had about 300 pilot studies and institutions involved, and they came up with a new CEFR companion volume with new descriptors. Why is that important? The core idea is that the CEFR is raising questions. We are not answering them. They put emphasis on the idea of reflection. And they developed new descriptors in areas which are absolutely important nowadays: mediation, plurilingual and pluricultural competence, online interaction, and a totally new set of descriptors in the area of phonological control. And they set up a new model. They moved from the learner using linguistic repertoire, paying attention to accuracy and correctness. And nowadays it's the interaction, it's mediation, it's negotiation of meaning and co-construction of meaning by making use of the plurilingual and pluricultural competence, and everything set into a certain context. So the word context is essential here too. And as we can see in this picture, the idea of mediation. Mediation creates bridges. Mediation has a positive impact on relationships. Mediation creates a trusted and safe space where people are able to communicate who are otherwise not able, for whatever reason, they're able to co-create meaning a reality. So what is the plurilingual and pluricultural competence? It means switching from one language, from one dialect or variety to another. And it also means exploiting paralinguistics, your body language, your voice, whatever belongs to that. And we have to add the topics translanguaging and code switching too. Translanguaging means all your linguistic resources are one interrelated dynamic repertoire, whereas code switching kind of separates, it's the coexistence of different languages at either a social or an individual level. So back to practice, back to you. What about your plurilingual and pluricultural repertoire? As you can see, there's a lot of dynamic. I started learning as English as a foreign language, then it moved to global English. German is my mother tongue. Spanish had a huge impact on my repertoire too. I still remember giving a talk in Romania at an international conference, and a colleague of mine asked me, how the way did you pronounce parameters? And I realized, yes, I did it the Spanish way. So we have to be aware, we as trainers and our learners have to become aware of this relationship between the different languages. And again, we have to ask ourselves what rituals, what relationships, what restrictions are included. Yes, I can see there Italian, Dutch, and Turkish. So there we have the multiple identities as well. Why is the phonological control so important? Back in the year 2000, Jennifer Jenkins discovered that most of communication breakdown was caused by phonological transfer from your mother tongue, from L1. And she established the so-called Lingua Franca core, and that was supposed to be the beginning of the research of English as a lingua franca. So let's get back to the CEFR companion volume. It's a total new set of descriptors. There is a focus on intelligibility as primary concept of phonological control. What does intelligibility mean? It's the question to the extent to which a speaker's message is actually understood by a listener. Nonetheless, just because an L2 accent feature is noticeable, it does not mean that this accent feature distracts from intelligibility. And this is a very important aspect. Learners, and we as teachers and our trainers, or however you call yourselves, coaches, we have to be aware of the impact of our L1s. We have to be aware of the sound articulation and the sound recognition and of prosodic features. That means the music of language. How closely are the languages related? There are stress-timed languages like English or German, syllable-timed languages or tonal languages, and this will have a huge impact on how you pronounce English. And all these things are covered in the new descriptors of phonological control. In the process of developing these new descriptors, Picardo also published very interesting things. So it's the idea of moving away from the native speaker and establishing English as a lingua franca as a concept to be followed. And there's a further aspect, listener factors. There are 3 areas. Communication can only work if the decoding of fast and spontaneous speech is possible, if people are familiar with foreign accented speech, and if there is a willingness to communicate, and if you're aware of your attitudes. So what does decoding mean? Decoding is a bottom-up process, decoding of sounds and chunks, in contrast to our normal way of listening, making use of the prior knowledge going top down. Richard Caldwell developed wonderful metaphors describing the messiness of listening from from a tidy greenhouse via a garden to the messy jungle. Those are different sound shapes we have to be able to deal with in order to communicate successfully. So when looking at the elements of communication, we can see if we are not able to get over this first barrier to produce an intelligible accent, if our listeners are not familiar with different accents, or if they are not able to decode fast and authentic speech, or maybe they are just not willing to, or have a certain attitude, they think that you are not competent enough because of your accent, then there will be a communication breakdown. Now we have to get to another topic, English as a lingua franca, because we had this shift from the native speaker to ELF. ELF is any use of English among speakers of different L1s. It is the communicative medium of choice. It is an open source phenomenon that is constantly adapted by intelligibility and accommodation. So there's a lot of flexibility, hybrid things involved. And the third part, multilingualism, including translanguaging. We have to ask ourselves, what does that mean for international business? Can Ranta and Luiliala Salminen, two Finnish experts working at an international business school in Finland, they said that people using BELF, they want to get the job done, they want to create rapports, and mostly they work together in communities of practice. And those are very important things. They are an ideal area of informal learning, where the deficient user of English that we have in the English as a foreign language model becomes suddenly a competent and confident learner and user. Nonetheless, this communication is not automatically cooperative or in the sense of conflict-free, and it is of course not culturally neutral. The communities of practice have a shared repertoire, and this consists of two elements, linguistic and non-linguistic elements. That means BELF and other languages. That could be any maps, any charts, whatever. And the second area, social and domain-specific parameters. Those are cultural norms, phase issues, time constraints, a shared expert knowledge. All these things coming together and helping the people to develop enough intercultural competence to be able to talk about how they communicate and how they could improve communication. So that means that Kamara and Marda described that we have to set up a kind of conversational contract depending on the context, the respective culture and the situation. Our identities, our roles, our relationships will be determined. And Ed Schein, he is supposed to be the father of behavior, of organizational culture. He came up with the idea of setting up cultural islands where people come together to co-create a new reality. And this brings us to another area of putting things into practice. What about your cultural identities? So we have different areas we have to be aware of. There's a dynamic development. Some areas may be more important, may have become less important. We have to be aware of this movement, of this development, of this fluidity. And this is something that our learners have to be aware of too. So again, what about you? What about your cultural identities? Have there been any shifts in recent times? So you could add these things to the chat box as well to share. Okay. Yeah, Greek and German, so referring it to the languages. Yes, Evangelia, thank you for sharing this. Moving from Germany to Arizona. Okay, yes. So you can add the online community playing a bigger role. Yes, exactly. So this has been a huge shift too. So again, a very important area where we have to pay attention to, and where we have to raise our learners' awareness. What about the intercultural research area? In 2018, Milton Bennett gave a webinar for SIETAR Europe about the epistemological framework of intercultural communication. He called it the end of relativism, and he came to the conclusion that we have the constructive paradigm. We have to co-create at a meta level. So coming from different directions, we can notice that how important the context has become. Contextual acuity, that means you have to be aware of your own personal, organizational cultural context. And in the next step, contextual agility, you have to be able to change perspective, to become aware of the other person's reality, and then to start co-creating at a meta level. And the other day, I went to a webinar organized by Mr. Bolton, and he talked about the different concepts of culture. It was called Rethinking Interculturality. So the main idea was that we have kind of a continuum, moving from a structure perspective to a process perspective. So we could have a monoculturality, that means we have the separation. We could have multiculturality in the form of integration, and we could have interculturality, and as the last step, transculturality, which refers to being part of networks in a kind of very open and fluid system. He came to the conclusion that interculturality is the point which kind of helps us to make sense, and which explains how we could be able to cope with a world of VUCA and with this COVID-19 pandemic. And there's a lot of uncertainty. Our sense of security may be shivering, and we have to be able to deal with it, with this situation. Depending on the context, we start self-positioning ourselves. And this could be in a very fluid way too. So again, this idea of co-constructing reality, co-constructing meaning, and really paying attention to relationships. Let's move to the area of English as corporate language, and a global employer survey, which was carried out in the year 2016. About 5,000 employers took part in 38 countries and 20 different industries. They found out that 80% of the academic journals are written in English, and that 85% of international organizations choose English as their corporate language. What do you think? What is the gap of English skills that employers want their employees to have, and the skills that the employees are really able to offer? Just put your percentage figure in the chat box, please. 40, 30, 80, 50. So some people seem to have read my introduction, because yes, it is 40% in every industry across all company sizes. And what do you think? What about the top and middle management? What figure would you put in there? Yes, please write into the chat box. What is the gap? Okay, so at the same level, 25%, I can see 20%, 80%. So it's really a lot of variety in your answers. Actually, it's 25% in spite of increasing investment over the past years. So we can see that the top and middle management is better equipped than many other employees. And we can notice from our training practice that nowadays every employee is expected to be able to communicate in English. Sedal Neely had a look at the Rakuten thing, and they started with a one language policy. And when asking the question whether it is a good idea or whether I can do it, there were 4 different types of reactions. At best, the people were quite inspired or indifferent, or they felt oppressed or even frustrated. The inspired people were most of the time Americans, and they thought that having English means that they have the American culture too. But English turned out to be a Trojan horse because the Japanese work values still remained the same. How to solve this? Again, Anne Kankantara came up with a great solution. She used the metaphor of the theater, dividing things into a front stage and a backstage. That means the front stage is the official language of the company, where English as a national language is used, and it is based on a certain standard. And the other languages are kind of used in a separate way. In contrast to this, we have the working language, we have BELF, we have multilingualism, and we have the situation-specific use of the language. Nonetheless, she is not totally satisfied because she thinks that in this case, the front stage still has a gatekeeping power, and she would suggest that plain English is used instead. Plain English is based on a plain English campaign. That means fighting for crystal clear communication, and it was established in the year 1979. And the European Union has published things too, how to write clearly. And there are also many authors who are of the opinion that we have to train the monolingual native speaker too. And the parameters to kind of measure the success of communication will be comprehensibility in speaking and writing, appropriateness of language, and politeness with regard to relationship building. BELF is not a variety. Adopting a BELF-oriented approach is a big change in mindset for all the stakeholders involved. We have to be aware of the 3 principles: the multilingual, the negotiation, and the intercultural principle. And there is this area of meta-learning, meta-cognition, meta-communication. We need strategies. They are described in the CEFR Companion Volume 2. We have to question. We have to ask ourselves, is this still okay? So the area of reflection has been totally underestimated. We are kind of interested in growing, and we hardly ever stand still and look back and really think about what is going on there, what could be improved, how to react to these different things. Now we get to the final area of this webinar. The question is, back to work as usual. Keith Ferrazzi is of the opinion that there will be a focus on virtual teams, that the COVID-19 pandemic will have a huge impact on how companies will organize their corporate learning. The chief learning officers have noticed that with regard to the growing number of training days they really need for their employees to get them adapted to this complex world, it will not be possible to really carry this out face to face in the future. So let's go forward. He advocates a co-elevation. That means the team together will get higher. Back to abnormal. Yes, that is an alternative too, and we should definitely think about these options. And there is another author. She is a member of the Forbes Coaches Council, and she is of the opinion that we have been discussing about this change, about this paradigm shift for a long time, and it's about time to get used to it, to co-create this new way of working and being without a clear separation of private and working life. And we will have to find ways to deal with this new situation. Yeah, what does that mean for our topics? If we should really be reduced to a more virtual world, we will be reduced to our visual image. We will be reduced to the use of our voice. And we would not like to be judged by just having a noticeable accent feature coming from our L1s. So it is more than ever important that we are really aware of how accent, identity, language, and culture belong together. We really have to add these aspects to the map of diversity. We have to include as many people as possible. And it is very important that people really find their English voice, that they become aware of their strength and that they are proud of their English voice. Yes, and how to achieve this? So there has to be a shift of paradigm, and that refers to raising awareness and really asking ourselves, do I have a bias? Do I have certain preferences? Are there any accents that you can honestly say you are more fond of than others? Maybe you can just feels like neo-colonialism to you, George Simmons. Yeah, okay. So I think this would be a moment to discuss this question. What do you think? Is it really gonna happen? What will be? And will we be able to really get rid of this focus on how a person speaks? Will this idea of the perfect native speaker, of not having any accent, of speaking like the Queen, become more important? Audio is one sense, video and sound two senses. Yeah, okay, so that is very important. Diversifying is the best strategy, Ahmed. Yeah, that's definitely, you are fond of the Italian accent. Okay, so that is a very honest answer that you give here. Any more points? You have an Irish accent. Okay, yeah, Marcella, yeah. Maybe it starts first from within. Yeah, it's a matter of education. Yes, it is a matter of education, but it is also a matter of self-awareness. Are we really aware of how it works for us? Are we aware how difficult it may be for some people, although they have been training for a very long time? Yeah, Irish accent, yeah, they seem to be very popular. Okay, fond of Irish and English accents. Okay, accent is one factor. Okay, there's a tendency to deposh. Yes, exactly. There are prejudices. Yes, exactly. Embracing one's accent. Yes, Rosa, very good comment. Yes, so from my point of view, we have to invest in communities of practice. We have to invest in relationships, and we have to invest in people. And I think we should not underestimate how much we can learn being together in a community of practice. It will increase our collective intelligence. We all will benefit from coming together, from working together, from setting a goal, and from achieving anything. Welsh accent, yes, okay. Yes, so I have come to the end of this webinar, and now is the time for you to ask questions. The business students hold really high standards. Yes, that is a very important aspect too. So students, Pamela, Jennifer Arden, our learners may not really be aware of the fact how language is used in the international world. And that is definitely a very important aspect, and that we have to tell them that most of the time, unless they really know that they will only be in contact with so-called native speakers, that most of the time they will have to use the language with other people, having learned English not as their first language. Okay, so the questions are moving rather fast. So shall we ban pronunciation courses and perfection? So the first step, Natalia, the first idea is a needs analysis. We have to ask ourselves, we have to ask our learners, what do they need to get their job done? If they tell you that they will only be in contact with native speakers, okay, they can strive for this ideal. But the first and foremost aspect is that their accent is intelligible. And this is something they have to work on. And this means that they need a certain basis. You have to guarantee that other people will be able to understand them. Otherwise, you haven't done a good job. You haven't done them any favor. And that means, how could accent affect intelligibility? It could affect intelligibility to a huge extent. But as we mentioned, we have two sides. It needs two to tango. The one person speaking, and there may be the other person. It could be from an objective perspective. You could speak with an intelligible accent, but the listener may not be used. The listener may not be familiar with your accent. And for that reason, it is very important that you start integrating, that you have a lot of listening materials in your training so that people can really get used to it. Non-native English teachers are often discriminated. Yes, I fully agree. And there is this huge campaign organized by TEFL Equity, and there was this plenary talk by Silvana Richardson at the ITEFL conference in 2016. And they kind of tackled this problem, but there have been huge development in recent years. Is accent really defining our intelligence? I don't know. That depends on your definition of intelligence. So if you are more in favor of Howard Gardner's idea of intelligence, which goes into the direction of multiple intelligences, then there may not be an easy answer to your question. Emanuela, I felt offended by the French. Oh, sorry, I didn't catch it. So the chat is moving rather fast. Sad reality, native speakers are often hired even though they don't have the professional qualification to teach. Yes, exactly. So this is hopefully this movement that was started by the Council of Europe by publishing the CEFR companion volume will change things. The Council of Europe is really interested in starting an ELF-aware multilingual, inclusive way of teaching. And they started a project that is called the Enrich Project. It is a group of about 250 people coming together from all over the world and learning about the theories, about the theoretical background, and putting these into practice. And I'm very proud to say that I'm part of this team. And as a consequence of this, they would like to boost this paradigm shift from the native speaker as ideal model to English as a lingua franca, to intelligibility as primary construct of phonological control, and getting rid of this idea of being perfect, not paying attention to how a person speaks, but paying attention to the context, to stop discrimination because of a person having, everybody speaks English like a native or where they are raised. Okay, actually everybody has an accent, and there are different varieties of English. That means people living in the UK speak a different English in different regions of the UK, and there's definitely a huge discrimination in Britain still happening. So there's only a small number of people attending private schools speaking the posh RP accent, but they still have about 37% of all the positions of managers. And that definitely means that there's a huge discrimination. Maybe you remember Fiona Hill, who moved to the States and who kind of spoke in this Trump thing. And she kind of said that she never would have had any chance of really having a professional movement with her accent. In the States, there is accent discrimination happening too, but for them, she sounds British, and it doesn't matter whether it is only a working class background. This topic needs to be a workshop. Okay, invest in people, the best to do. Okay, yes, thank you, Ahmed. Thanks for the most, okay. Yes, intelligibility is key. In maritime, yes, Evan, exactly. The IMO guidelines and pronunciation, okay. So I'm very sorry, the huge number of participants makes it nearly impossible to follow your questions. Maybe you type them again. Okay, thanks for the presentation, food for thought. Yes, so if you need any more information, especially how to put these things into practice, I added the list of references, and I also wrote an article about having a more practical approach, how to practice the decoding, how to practice familiarizing with different accents. And that may be important for some of you. And you are welcome to get in contact with me should you have any questions. That's empowering. Thanks, Natalia. Yes, I hope so. So I think especially as a so-called non-native teacher or trainer, we have to be proud of ourselves, of our English voice, but we also have to be aware of all the different biases influencing ourselves and influencing the way that we communicate with other people, and that we really pay attention to the other person and take these things into account. Varieties of English, Dutch, spread virus, okay. Again, great webinar, okay. Most of you seem to be thanking. If there aren't any more questions, would you be able to quickly go over on how CEFR is integrating accent? Yes, so the CEFR speaks about a norm. So it has to be intelligible depending on a norm, and the norm is influenced by the context. That means that that in a specific context, the norm could be totally different to another context. That means if there is the CEO of a company talking to journalists, there is a different norm compared to any marketing manager talking to his colleague in another country. So the norm depends on the context, and the context defines the identities, the roles, and the relationships. And these are things that will have to be implemented in the exams too. But I think that the exam boards will not be able to ignore these aspects, and that in many companies, this is already daily practice. But maybe it's our job to raise the people's awareness. Okay, to share my presentation. Yeah. So the recording will be available. Yes, there's this nice video about two Scottish people in the elevator too, and AI is not really able to deal with their accent. Can you share your academic sources? Yes, of course, Ramiro. I can go back. The recording will be uploaded exactly. I just go back so that you could take screenshots if you would like to have anything here. Okay, so that is a rather long list of references. I hope that was too fast. Okay, oh, more messages. Okay. Yeah. Could you give an example of community? SIETAR Europe is a community of practice. So any place where people come together, they have mutual engagement, they have a shared goal, they have a shared repertoire, and they would like to co-elevate. They would like to lift up the knowledge and the expertise of a group. So this is, so there are many possibilities of communities of practice, and I think it's essential to be part of them. And I think many will agree, we wouldn't be where we are without our communities of practice, without our network. Some more chance for a screenshot. Rudi Kammerer. Yes, exactly. Yes. The book Rudi Kammerer and Judith Mader published is absolutely helpful. I consider it as a basis. They refer to the old CEFR, and things are still valid. Everything that is written there could be used, gives you a theoretical background, and helps you to put these things into practice too. Where can we reach you? You can reach me via LinkedIn, Mary. So the LinkedIn profile, so we could connect via LinkedIn, and there we could exchange any further information if yes, they've introduced a new CEFR. There are a lot of webinars on their website too about the details. If you are interested in the details of the CEFR companion volume, it is our best ally, and we really should make use of it. And we can see these overlapping things between intercultural communication, and Milton Bennett called it getting back to our roots. And I think this is what is advocated by the CEFR companion volume via the Council of Europe too. Okay, no, I'm not on Instagram, I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. Okay, so I think there are no more questions. So I would like to hand over to you, Steve, for any things you would like to wrap up with.
Katrin, I think there are probably 100 more questions.
Yes, probably.
But unfortunately, time is over. Thank you so much for that very insightful, engaging presentation, sharing your thoughts, your research, your findings, and some of the tips that we can use moving forward. It brought back to my mind a couple of years ago when I was doing a graduate course in intercultural studies. One of the exercises we had to do was to start listing what we considered our privileges to be. And one of the first ones that came to my mind, and I had not really thought of it before, was I'm a native US English speaker. And it's really incredible that I've seen over the years how many doors that's opened.
Yes.
It really, really makes a difference. And I just can't be grateful enough for that.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we kind of support this movement, and that we are active, and that we really bring forward our advantages as a so-called non-native speaker.
Yeah, yeah. So again, thank you. I have launched a poll for feedback from everyone. As has been mentioned, we will be uploading the recording of the video shortly, probably by tomorrow. It will be available on the CEFR YouTube channel. I will also include the slides with the references in the YouTube description, so they will be available. And probably Katrin's LinkedIn link.
No, it's on the website, yeah.
It's on the website, so you can contact her that way. I may also, because there are so many good comments in the chat, I think I will post that too after removing all identifying information, so that there you can see the links and the comments that way, because there was really so much good information shared, not just by Katrin, but also by all of you attending. So thank you very much. A couple of announcements. The next CEFR webinar is on the 15th of June, and it's very timely. The title is, Are You Having Fun Online? Are we having fun online these days? Come join us on the 15th. Lise Waters will be taking us through some fun activities we can be doing online. Also, there are other events going on. CEFR Spain has a couple of webinars. There's an online conference at the end of June. And for the CEFR members, on the 26th of June is the annual general meeting, if you're interested. And all of that is available on the CEFR website. So with that, have a wonderful rest of your day. Again, Katrin, really appreciate you sharing with us. And we look forward to seeing as many of you in the future. Take care, be well, and good day.
Thank you for
Bye,
attending.
everyone.
Bye-bye.